and welcome back to yet another episode of the DD Geopolitics podcast. We are joined once again by the one and only, my favorite, Pepe Escobar. He is a columnist at The Cradle, editor-at-large at Asia Times, and an independent geopolitical analyst focused on Eurasia. How are you? It's so good to have you back.
Hi, everybody. Greetings from NATO Stan. I'm still in NATO
Stan. Back in NATO Stan.
Yeah, but only for the next 48 hours. I'm leaving on Friday. Thank heavens.
Where are you going?
Central Asia.
Oh, he's so excited. And what are you going to do there?
But I guess I need to go to the heartland every year. So I'm going back to the heartland to see what's going on, especially the three Central Asian stands, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Kazakhstan. And that's what I do with Southeast Asia as well. I'll be going to Southeast Asia in October to see what's going on in Southeast Asia, so Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, etc. And meanwhile, I'll be in Russia. So that's it. I'll be on the road for the next 3 months, nonstop.
So where you just got back from Russia, right?
No, that was a while ago. I spent 2 months in Russia, and I got back after Victory Day. And then I was in NATO Stan for a while. I went to Spain. I just been to Sicily. But in the meantime, I was in Brazil. I was invited for a series of conferences in Brazil. So I spent like a little over 2 weeks in 4 big cities in Brazil. It was great because the conferences were packed, the questions were excellent, and I had to start speaking Portuguese again, which is something I never do.
That's not an easy language.
Yes, and if you don't speak it for a long while, you lose the argot, you lose the slang, and I learned so many extraordinary slangy expressions, amazing, from different parts of the country, from the south, from the southeast. It was fascinating. It was really great. And for me, it was important to see what's going on with this new Lula government, and that's a very complicated story,
Well, not to get too deep into it, do you see Brazil as being still upholding their part of BRICS and being engaged in that, in the international kind of?
This is a very good question, because the answer, it's very complex. I hate to give all of you guys a short answer, but okay. Let's try the 3-minute version, right? Brazil is under enormous pressure by the Americans. I think many of you know that Jake Sullivan, during the transition from Bolsonaro to Lula, Jake Sullivan dropped in Brasilia with the famous list. He said, look, we supported you, we supported you diplomatically, we wanted to have democracy back in Brazil, and here's the list. And the list is horrible because it includes ministries that the Americans practically remote control. And obviously Lula, he had to, after all, he was supported by the Americans before, during, and right after the election. And the problem is Lula is a master negotiator, and he's very good at equilibrium in terms of geopolitics. But he knows that his margin of maneuver is extremely slim. So he cannot antagonize the Americans in any major way, especially when he starts talking about de-dollarization. And at the same time, he knows that Brazil is respected all across the Global South as one of the leaders of the Global South and one of the leaders at BRICS. So at the moment, they are not a leader at BRICS. The actual leaders of BRICS are Russia and China. The agenda of BRICS and BRICS expansion is basically, I would say, suggested, to put it diplomatically, by Moscow and Beijing. The good thing about BRICS is everything is by consensus. So obviously the other ones, they have to agree, of course, with the major directives. But their margin of maneuver as weak links is not as high as two real sovereigns, which is the case of Russia and China. So Brazil inside BRICS, with the expansion to BRICS Plus, they run the risk of becoming a minor player. Just like South Africa is already a minor player, and India is an enormously complex case because India, they're always hedging their bets. They still don't know if they're going to follow the Americans on Quad and all of that bullshit, or if they're going to carve a path as a true leader of the global South, and that includes being a true leader in all these organizations, BRICS, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, etc. So the dynamics inside BRICS is very complicated, and I'm very sorry to say, in realpolitik terms, that Brazil is not a major player as it stands. It may become one later on. But considering how much the Americans look at Brazil, they say, we cannot Brazil let go. And if they start emitting signals that they are aligning with the other side, between commas, hybrid war is going to be unleashed upon them. So it's a very, very fragile situation, to say the least, you know.
Well, you kind of brought it up in while you were talking, and I kind of want to ask, because what I'm seeing is that what I feel is that the West is in a very weakened state right now, globally speaking. So do you see this as, I'm hopeful, I'm always too hopeful. I think Pepe's also a romantic like me, but do you see do you see South and Latin America kind of utilizing this opportunity as well? Maybe it could be a good opportunity for Brazil to get out from under that yoke, kind of.
Look, this is another excellent question that would require like a day to answer you properly. The problem, once again, is the comprador elites in all these South American and Latin American countries. These are the most rapacious and ignorant, arrogant, and corrupt elites among the most corrupt elites in the world. I happened, unfortunately, to know the Brazilians very well, and a little bit of the Argentinians as well. And this is the problem, because first of all, they hate the indigenous population. They are not real patriots. They hate the fact that, most of them, they hate the fact that they are Argentinians or Brazilians. They would love to be Americans living in Miami, or exactly, and laundering their money in Dubai or the Cayman Islands. It's absolutely disgusting. Even some of them are well educated. They send their kids to Yale, to Columbia, to Stanford, etc. But still, they keep this mindset of a comprador elite, So they are in the wrong country. The only thing that Brazil and Argentina means for them is places to be exploited by their companies, by their shady dealings, etc. So these are the people who basically prevent very wealthy countries in terms of natural resources and tremendous potential, young populations, hardworking, like Brazil and Argentina, to become first-class powers. Brazil, without the Bolsonaro interregnum, today could be the fifth largest economic power in the world. They were almost already there. And now they are at 12th or 13th and still going down. And the Lula government, Lula himself and the Lula government, they have an enormous task ahead. And because Lula is so good in terms of balancing interests, the country is growing again. They are little by little reducing unemployment. Adverse interests are not complaining too much because the stock exchange is up and the dollar is down. Not too much, but a little bit compared to the previous years. So the country is relatively stable, but relatively in Brazil means a lot, much more than in other latitudes, At least the country is not going down like it was during the Bolsonaro years. That's an enormous advancement. And at the same time, internally, to confront all these interests is very hard for Lula when his own government is infiltrated by foreign interests, and you know exactly who I'm talking about. And in Congress and the Senate, he's a minority. So he has to compose with these people all the time. He has to cajole them, he has to talk to them. He's very good at that. But he spends most of his time basically convincing other people about things that he is absolutely sure are needed to implement in the country. So once again, it's very fragile internally. And of course, in South American terms, they have the possibility of reinvigorating the UNASUR association. Once again, there is a sort of pink tide across South America, but shades of pink and shades of gray coexisting, you know. You have to know exactly how to deal with the Colombians, very complicated. With the Peruvians, also very complicated. Argentina, they are in dire straits economically. Can you believe that they got basically a loan from the Chinese in yuan to pay an IMF loan? So basically, they got a loan to be able to keep paying loans to the IMF. It's a completely crazy situation.
I can believe it. Argentina is, at least in terms of growth, not doing too badly as of last year, but because of the persistent drought, I think that good luck that Fernandez has had since they emerged from COVID is about to run out.
Yeah. You know, you're right. Yeah.
Because Argentina has these fantastic stop-start dynamics which is where everybody keeps harping on, I think unfairly, where it's a disaster. But actually, Argentina has these periods where it's extremely dynamic, but it's never sustained. And there's actually a good case in point recently because in recovering from COVID, they've grown faster than Chile, but you would never know this, both because the Western press doesn't like Argentina because Argentine workers do things like strike, and Argentina still has some strong labor unions, whereas Chileans have been told their place and keep their place.
Exactly.
Somewhat but that's essentially why I say they like Chile. They really love the Pinochet constitution, and they don't like the fact that the Argentine military was both more incompetent and in its own way less brutal than the Chilean military. But that's a whole nother topic. I think bringing up the question of Brazil, one thing looking at the Congress that I'm interested in is Lula became president. Why is it, therefore, that in congressional elections that didn't translate into any sort of resurgence of the PT? And why is it that the MDB refuses to die?
Well, there's a short answer to this question, because Lula is extremely popular, at least with 50% of the population. I would say around 60 to 70% all across Brazil, not in the big cities. It's different. For instance, he has tremendous problems in the big cities, São Paulo and Rio. But if you go to the Northeast, for instance, or north of Brazil, Lula is almost unanimous, you know. And the Workers' Party is still directly connected with horrible corruption scandals. And another thing that I'm very, very sorry to admit, but you have to if you're doing realpolitik. The people at the vanguard, let's put it this way, or at least in the leadership of the Workers' Party, they are extremely mediocre. Extremely mediocre. And this is terrible. Some of the best cadres that they had left or rejected the party or were appalled by the levels of corruption. And the people who are now becoming ministers or came back, or the people who are in the that control the inner workings of the party, they are really mediocre. So this is absolutely terrible. If you think the Democrats are mediocre in the US, take a look at some parties in the global South, like the Workers' Party in Brazil. So this explains this dichotomy between the Workers' Party having lousy elections in many key states in Brazil and Lula being elected. There you go.
So here is another question, I think, because one of the key developments in the past few weeks, and it will touch upon a lot of subjects, and so therefore we'll have a lot of questions, and I think we'll be looking forward to hearing your answers, is, all right, for the benefit of our listeners, why did the coup in Niger take place first? That's the first question to answer, because from that flow a lot of others.
Because finally a new generation of young Africans, they finally got the message. We need to get rid of France. We are basically colonies being exploited by the French, and we have to do something and anything about it. It started with Mali, then Burkina Faso, with Guinea, now with Niger. Algeria has very good relations with both China and Russia, and they are a top candidate to become a member of BRICS Plus. If not in the first wave, maybe in the second wave. So what we're watching essentially is a sort of belt from Senegal to the west, to Eritrea in the east of Africa, that sooner or later, and I would say sooner, they will get rid not only of the French, but also of remnants of European domination, whatever that is. And this is all across the Sahel. So when you see what's being played at the Maghreb in the north and to the south in the Sahel is, I would say, a second wave of rejection of colonialism, rejection of neo-colonialism. Each of the coups, of course, and each of the military rebellions, let's put it this way, they have their own dynamics, of course. But when you look at the profile of these the new military leaders, like Ibrahim Traoré, the military leader in Mali, the guy is 35, he's well-educated, he's a patriot, he's a nationalist, he knows exactly how Africa has been exploited, not only by the French, but all the other European powers relentlessly since the so-called decolonization era. And now they finally, okay, it's now or never. And obviously they were looking at the rest of the world in terms of decolonization efforts in West Asia, in Southeast Asia, and they learned a lot from the Algerians, they learned a lot from the Vietnamese, they learned a lot from the Iranians, they learned a lot from Hezbollah, and there you go. And now they're applying their lessons in the Sahel. So this is a major, absolutely major development. And obviously, I'm talking from Paris to you guys. This is where I live. This is where I live part of the year. This is where I have practically nobody to talk to, as I always tell my friends everywhere. In North America, across Europe, in Asia, etc. So when I come here, basically, I stay home. And of course, I really see France when I go outside of Paris, when I go to Normandy, when I go to Bretagne. This is real France, you know. And then when I talk to my friends who live in the south, for instance, then you see what's really happening. Paris is a bubble, of course, and Paris is a bubble basically controlled by the central government, which happens to be here. And the people who control Paris basically are the same people, the same families who study in the same schools. And obviously, if you see a foreigner saying, look, you're bullshit, you are immediately ostracized. I have been ostracized by some of my best friends, in fact, like saying, I went to the other side. I went to the dark side, in fact. So they think that I'm Darth Vader, you know. So it's really ridiculous. And the conversations that you can have about what's going on in France, the French political system, what they call France-Afrique, which is the French system that basically continues to colonize basically Western Africa and parts of Central Africa. You talk about this with Italians, with Spaniards. This is what I did 2 months ago. I was in a conference in Ibiza, and we were talking about that with Germans, with Spanish businessmen, with Portuguese, but not with French. And if you are here, you talk to French who are completely ostracized, you know, people who have small websites or who cannot be published by the big publishing houses because they have been denounced as infiltrators of foreign agents, etc. If you have any political position nowadays, which is apart from Macronism, which is the religion espoused by Les Petits Rois, the little king at the Élysée Palace, you are immediately marginalized. So, and obviously, so when you, yesterday, 2 days ago, I turned on the 8 o'clock news to see what they're talking about Niger. They refuse to admit that they are being kicked out of large parts of Africa. It's simple as that. For them, this is inadmissible. It's a bunch of barbarians. It's a bunch of in fact, they are branding the new Niger government as a bunch of terrorists. You say that Niger is going to become the new Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, now new Al-Qaeda in the Sahel, and it's going to be a terrorist focus, threatening the whole of Africa and even Europe. So obviously you cannot have an enlightened conversation with these people, which obviously the French ruling class, who always profited from all that. So, but in terms of understanding what's going on in Africa, the Italians are starting to get the picture, the Germans got the picture, and obviously people in West Asia, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iran, they totally understand what's going on in Africa, and not to mention our Russian and Chinese friends, which are going to profit from it handsomely in terms of new businesses, new connectivity corridors, and more African nations who are going to become even more attached to multilateral organizations that escape World Bank, IMF, and all the usual suspects that we know. So expect sooner or later, maybe medium term, a lot of African nations who will become members of BRICS Plus. And some of them are already making moves to, which is fantastic. They want to be part of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Can you imagine like having Algeria as part of the SCO? This would be something which is not impossible. It's not impossible at all. The SCO could be a mechanism only for Eurasia, but they are trying to get to expand to other parts of the global south. And the Eurasia Economic Union, that's even more interesting. They are planning to strike free trade deals with nations all over the spectrum. They already have a deal with Cuba. So why not other nations in Latin America? And why not other nations in Africa? So this is the scope of this new African decolonization movement is so huge. And the great thing is this was being discussed in St. Petersburg last week. This morning, I was talking to one of my sources at the summit. I didn't go for a lot of reasons, but I had some excellent sources. And they were telling me, you have no idea how well received they were and how ecstatic they were that now they are being recognized as global players. Can you imagine? Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea, Equatorial Guinea, Algeria, Morocco, everybody, it's fantastic. It's a brand new world for them, and they are absolutely ecstatic to be part of this brand new world, and the fact that they are being welcomed by these new multilateral organizations, which are basically global south organizations.
Do you want to go down the rabbit hole a little bit with me? Like
yes, totally.
Like a little bit of conspiracy theory. So with all of the goings on, so this is going to pretty much include all of it. So we have this grain deal, right? This grain deal falls apart. Russia says, I'm not doing your grain deal anymore. You don't meet my the obligations.
Obligations, right.
And I think you're using it for weapons. Russia comes out and says,
they had proof.
Right. I've tested these ships. They have tested positive for weapons. No more grain deal. Though Turkey and Ukraine start freaking out, right? They're freaking out about the grain deal. So Russia's like, I'm doing whatever. Russia starts having their meetings. They have the Russia-Africa summit. They know that they're like just draining weapons out of the West during this counteroffensive in Ukraine. The president of Burkina Faso says the terrorists in my country are getting weapons from Turkey. He didn't say they're getting from Turkey. He said they're getting American weapons. They're getting American weapons. So obviously these weapons are traveling through that pipeline, right? Turkey into Syria, probably down south into Africa.
Yes.
So then don't you think that while we're at the Russia-Africa summit, that Putin says this is going to be your best chance? Like, I don't see any way that these countries in Africa are coming together and rising up without at least a Russia or a China saying, like, go ahead and we got your back, like now's the time to go?
But there's no question. The "we got your back" message, they've been having it for, I would say, at least a year or so, especially this year, since the beginning of this year, no question, from both Russia and China. China, of course, because of their enormous investments in at least 34 to 35 African nations, and Russia because their diplomatic effort, especially since the beginning of the year, has been tremendous all across Africa, preparing the Russia-Africa summit. I was in Moscow during a key meeting preparing this summit. This was the parliamentarian summit in Moscow. It was in early April, if I'm not mistaken. Everybody was there. Yes, it was fantastic. I remember very well. You know why? The morning that Xi Jinping arrived in Moscow, Moscow was already taken over by Africans. All the central hotels, the delegations were staying in the central hotels, and it was a beautiful palace nearby the Duma, where they were having the parliamentarian discussions. And they were basically preparing the agenda and the meetings for the summit last week. So this was the culmination of a long diplomatic process. And you know, the Russians, when they apply themselves diplomatically, they are absolutely unrivaled all across the world, right? So obviously, these leaderships that had already subverted the old order in their countries, they were emboldened, and the new ones like Niger, they were looking around and said, okay, now it's our time. And of course, and now it's the fact that France lost 3 in a row, it's nobody would think about it. Mali, Burkina, and now Niger. It's 3 in a row. It could be 4 soon. Nobody foresaw that. And obviously, there are all sorts of usual suspect conspiracy theories that Wagner is involved in all of it. No, that's not true. Wagner, for instance, their presence in Africa, some places, yes, like the Central African Republic, I'm sorry, very, very strong. Mali, they called Wagner to basically fight terrorism for them, fight spin-offs of Al-Qaeda and ISIS in Africa. But Niger is a completely different story. Niger is basically, we had enough of being one of the poorest nations in the world and exporting all our uranium to these, motherfuckers in Paris, right?
You could say that.
You can say it. All right.
Well, I mean, even besides, if we look at the statistics, I mean, we know what AFRICOM does in Africa. We look at the statistics.
Yes.
And the terrorist attacks in Niger in the past couple of years have upticked times 900, or actually times 1,000, like times 1,000 with these American-made weapons.
Exactly.
So, I mean, and I was lucky enough to get to talk to a Malian the other night, and they were like, Wagner comes in and does what we ask them to do. Like,
that's the point.
They're not paid to serve Russia's public interest, like political interests here. We pay them, they do what they do. And when we stop paying them, they leave. They don't stick around.
That's exactly the point.
Yeah, he said
they are fighting terrorists.
Yeah.
And they are fighting terror-enabled, Western-enabled terror outfits. Just like the Russians, Hezbollah, and Iranian militias are fighting those people in Syria. It's exactly the same thing. And Wagner, obviously, they were very active in Syria as well. So what they're doing in Mali and Central African Republic is more or less what they did in Syria. And it's what they are still doing in Donbass, or were still doing in Donbass. That's a very complicated stuff. But But the fact that Prigozhin was at the Russian African summit and as a superstar in the backstage, that was fantastic. Because
I saw you very excited about it.
no, but this was, come on, this was totally Mick Jagger stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
He shows up and everybody wants to shake his hand and talk and have intimate conversations with him. Which
and
proves
if everybody's happy, then what's the problem?
Everybody's happy. Which proves once again that Maskirovka inside the Maskirovka that happened 2 months ago, it's still going on.
Yeah.
And it fooled everybody in the West.
Oh
my God.
We've been hearing for a year how bad Russia is at propaganda, but I mean, this has been like a 4-month story that they've just manufactured and have just literally changed the world with it. Like they manufactured, like the coup can't be real, right? We now know.
But it was never, the thing is that the Westerners could never understand, because first of all, because they don't have on the ground intel in Moscow and in Donbass. They don't know shit. And this is something that when you are in Moscow for a while, you see that they don't have nobody on the ground and they don't know shit of what happens.
Can I leave our listeners in suspense? Because I think this actually is something that is best to come at a bit of the end of a thread. Because
no problem.
Because I
we'll
think
be back
this,
to it.
Yes, because I think this it will be, to use the French quite purposefully, la pièce de la résistance, which then, in that vein of using French, I have to ask.
La crème de la crème, right?
La crème de la crème. Si vous préférez, on peut se discuter cet petit problème ici en l'Afrique de l'Ouest francophone en français, but I think our listeners might get a bit confused. So what I think instead we will do is ask this. Okay, so everybody wants to get rid of France. It's very, very clear that the French are sharply disliked. The question is why? Okay, why now? I mean, it's not as if the French haven't done questionable things in Africa, but before, political elites of all stripes, and the French tolerated, I say tolerated as if it's theirs to tolerate, but let's assume they're the big power in West Africa, which they were for a long time. They tolerated a wide variety of regimes, and a good example even over time and space is, I'm forgetting his name, forgive me, the first president of Côte d'Ivoire, the one who they called Le Vieux.
Oui, but I forgot his name.
Anyway, the first president of Côte d'Ivoire, the French, when he wanted to be a very smart developmentalist president, they helped him be a very smart developmentalist president. When he wanted to go build a very expensive capital city out in the middle of the jungle and getting even more personalistic and corrupt, the French were like, okay, we'll help you do that too, so long as the resources keep flowing to us. You want to help your people, we'll help your people. You want to not care too much about them, we'll do that for you too, so long as the resources go to us. And the French army will provide a backstop. And they tolerated Bokassa in Central African Republic until his craziness became too crazy for them to manage, and it was threatening the flow of resources and the stability of the country, at which case they got rid of him. Point being about this, the French actually, unlike the Americans, were far more flexible in terms of regime type, and even with what the president of a country could and could not do, so long as the resources flowed to them.
Exactly.
And even they do things, and you can see this when you open up Microsoft Word, that the French even did things like lobby on an international level for the different dialects of French of each of these countries to be recognized at an international level. So the point about that is that it's not as if the French were, like the Americans, always quite so heavy-handed and doing absolutely nothing to acknowledge their identity or their contribution to the world. But why is it suddenly now that the French are hated? Is it because they've gotten weaker, because they've gotten worse, or is there something else that I'm missing?
No, a key point is that everybody in Western Africa, Senegal, Mali, Mauritania, Burkina, Cote d'Ivoire. They follow what happens in France, and they follow the political scenes in Paris relatively closely. They can see that Macron, la Macronie in general, the Macronic thing is universally hated in France by at least 80% of the French, who are, of course, impotent to get rid of the little king. And they also see that how the only thing that is left, essentially, for France in terms of exploitative neocolonialism is plundering the former African colonies. It's fascinating, but I was getting into stuff that was said in the past by Mitterrand and Chirac, among others. And they said exactly the same thing. Mitterrand said that in the late 50s, if I'm not mistaken, and Chirac said the same thing in the 70s. If France loses the African colonies or sub-colonies or neo-colonies or non-colonies, we're fucked. This is essentially what they said. And they were absolute, and they knew it. And they had all reports saying it, because we're gonna lose not only the resources that they basically give to us, but of course, all that gold. Mali has 150, 160 gold mines and 0 gold stashed in Bamako. Guess where all the gold is here in Paris at the Banque de France. That kind of stuff, you know. And now we have a younger generation of true patriots that find, okay, maybe this is our last chance to really decolonize. Because now we have, this is how they are thinking. Now we have Russia and China and a great deal of the global south covering our backs. So this might be, I would say, an essay to answer your question. We still don't know in each individual nation the motivations. We know that there is an overall motivation, which is decolonization, and how to do it. How to do it? Basically, it has to be a military coup. And you need to have a military that is patriotic and has the interests of the nation in the first place, and stop the plundering mentality. This applies to Guinea, to Burkina, to Mali, and to Niger as well. And of course, once again, they studied what happened in different decolonization processes around the world. These people are you know, they learned their lessons, and they also learned what could happen if they did nothing. They could have an Iraqi destiny, they could have Libya destiny, or they could have Syria destiny. So, you know, all the historical examples were in front of them. Traoré is I'm very impressed by Ibrahim Traoré. It looks like he did his homework for years, and even at a very tender age of 35, he said, okay, it's now or never, it's my time, and I know how to do it. And for the moment,
I just really hate this whole, like, he's just some warlord without even just
he's just some warlord. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Right. Every African leader is just some warlord, you know,
exactly,
right?
Exactly.
Unless they're one of our African leaders. Then they were democratically elected, right? In an election that we watched. It was free and fair. We saw it. We saw the whole thing. But so, I mean, we have a 35-year-old man who just his background, trained by the UN, fought in Mali, left Mali, formed an anti-terrorism militia, killed terrorists in his own country, and is now beloved by the people. The easiest explanation is often the most correct, right? That's all there is to him. Like, he is just beloved by his people. And it's just like this weird, I don't know if it's ingrained racism or classism or whatever it is. It's just this weird thing that people have, that none of this can be authentic, right? It can't happen like this in Africa.
It's essentially racism. You're right.
Yes,
it's essentially
and it's
racist.
They had this. They had Thomas Sankara. We killed him. They had this. You act like these people don't know their own history. They've had freedom fighters. Exactly. They've had working class heroes. Like, this isn't just some warlord that picked up a gun one day and said, I'm taking over my entire country. That's crazy. That doesn't even make sense.
Of course not, but you know how the international media ecosphere work, no? When they don't understand a national liberation movement, which is these are national liberation movements, the only plan A that they don't even have a plan B. The only plan A that they have, which was taught to them by the CIA, is you demonize it. So it's a new warlord, the new Hitler, the new Saddam, or whatever. And this is what they're
He's the
doing.
new Getulio Vargas.
The new Getulio Vargas. Well done. So this is what they're doing now. They have no, like I told you guys, here in Paris, they have no idea what's going on in Niger. Period. And I was told that they had a crisis meeting at the Élysée, and nobody could give realpolitik answers. Nobody, including French, of course, obviously, including all those French diplomats and DGSE, all those connards. They pose as intellectuals of intelligence and all that. They didn't know anything. And this is interesting because when you talk to the old school intel guys in France, which are old school, very well educated, with vast experience and all that, and they are very critical of the new generations. They said these young people, or even these people who are in their 40s now, they don't know anything about anything.
They've been Americanized.
They have been Americanized to an extent that they lost touch of what's really happening in the global South, and they lost touch with something that France used to have during the Gaullist years as well. And that's why they were relatively respected in many places across the global South. They don't have that anymore. They are basically carbon copies of the State Department. So obviously they cannot understand anything.
Well, that would perhaps then explain why it is that it appears to be clueless, because I've been looking on France losing its position in horror, and the fact that the top political class seems utterly clueless, I think, helps explain a lot of things about why there's no more deft touch, there's no more sudden infusion of aid money to buy better feeling or developmental project to show that France is your friend, or no military intervention at just the right time before things get out of control, because the situation is watched very closely and understood very well. And after all, they made sure to school the elites so that everybody knows everybody. None of that anymore. But then that leads us on to the next question about this. So the coups d'etats take place, they happen, and the reaction of France is not to, oh, that's unfortunate, but we hope that we can work with the new government, and as a matter of fact, we have this new idea which we wanted to give to your predecessor, but unfortunately you overthrew him. But that's by the by. We have this great idea to continue our engagement with you, and that we'll think you'll really like this. Instead, it's issuing threats, sanctions, and also enlisting ECOWAS to perhaps do invasions. What is up with that, and why would Nigeria want to invade Niger? Which then also begs the other question, where we're starting to get to the rabbit hole and come back to the part where I interrupted you. What was the Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces of Algeria doing in Moscow, and why has Algeria signaled its support to Niger?
That was a killer. Well, of course, Algeria and Russia are discussing BRICS, but that's the geoeconomic aspect, and geopolitical, of course. Militarily, it's another story, because they knew that if anything happens in Niger and Niger asks for our help, we'll give it to them. And Russia help to Niger can go through Algeria. We still don't know, of course, how that would happen, but there is a possibility. If there was a sort of NATO-sanctioned ECOWAS invasion of Niger organized via Nigeria, which is something that it might happen because Nigeria is an absolute mess economically at the moment. So a wonderful way to change the subject would be fabricating an external enemy. But this is speculative at the moment. What is there is the possibility that Nigeria would be bribed by NATO, by the Americans, by the French, and using ECOWAS, which is an absolute piece of shit organization controlled by the Americans, the Brits, and the French. There's no African interest in terms of ruling ECOWAS. So Algeria and Russia were discussing, okay, how we could help these people. So we could have not only an alliance of Burkina and Mali supporting Niger, but we could also have Algeria. So at the moment, all of that is hanging in the air. What we heard these past 24 hours here is that because the Macron system is so absolutely clueless about everything, the possibility of the French organizing, condoning, or even encouraging some sort of invasion at the moment is very remote. First of all, because France follows the EU. And when I mean the EU, I mean the European Commission. And the obsession, as you know and our audience knows, is still Ukraine. So they cannot open a second front at the moment. They wouldn't have the weaponizing power, the manpower, nothing. The French have what? 600, 700 troops in Niger, if I'm not mistaken, and the Americans have 1,000 in that base that drone base in Agadez. That's not much, no? You cannot depose a new military government with less than 2,000 troops. They're not going to airlift American and EU scattered troops to Niger at the moment. No way. They can barely handle what they're doing in Ukraine. So this is going to be a very strong possibility is that there's some sort of backroom deal which will be organized short term. Like the French approached the new military government in Niamey and said, look, okay, we still want to import your uranium. What's the price now? And we're willing to pay it. And they strike some sort of Erdogan-style bargain. You know, this is not impossible at the moment. Considering that the French are so weak, and considering that ECOWAS is also weak, and consider that the Americans have other fish to fry than to start an invasion in Central Africa. So this is where we are at the moment. I don't see a possibility of this thing becoming a huge military operation anytime soon. There will be some sort of, and Algeria could work also as a middleman, as a qualified middleman and respected by all the players, including the French.
Which then, of course, leads to the last question, back where we were at the beginning when I interrupted, which has to do with what you are calling the maskirovka. So, bit of grounding for our listeners here who might be perhaps a bit lost in what we are referring to. On 24 June of this year, there was an attempted coup d'etat in Russia by the Wagner Group against...
May I interrupt you for 1 second?
Of course.
It was not a coup d'etat.
But I'm getting... but you can come in with that when you give your answer, because I'm setting up the framing here for
wonderful,
for you to deconstruct it and tell us what you think happened. So yes, on 24 June 2023, there was a coup d'état attempt by the Wagner Group PMC against the government of the Russian Federation. It was said by Prigozhin that he was aiming to get rid of Shoigu and Gerasimov and arrest them, and that it was a march for justice because the Ukrainians were at Tokmak, and also Wagner had been bombed by the Russian armed forces. And the end result was that it does appear as though a surveillance plane and an electronic warfare Mi-8 helicopter of the Russian armed forces were shot down by Wagner. But given the tensions of 4,000 armed mercenaries, which only represented 20% of Wagner's active strength, joining the coup or mutiny or what have you, it was a nasty day, but a surprisingly bloodless day. And at the end, Wagner called off its march on Moscow when it was clear that nobody had joined Prigozhin's rebellion or coup. He had no support for this in the armed forces, and the entire political class and military elite rallied not just around President Putin, but also around Defense Minister Shoigu, and gave their confidence to General of the Army Valery Gerasimov, the Chief of the General Staff. And then afterwards, it was intimated that Wagner would be disbanded because they were rebels, and Putin never forgives traitors, so Prigozhin was not long for this world. That is the Western narrative. Oh, and including the fact that it shows that Russia's government was perilously close to collapse, even though the entire political class and military elite declared their loyalty, and not one of them moved for the rebellion. Right, that's the conventional narrative. Please tear into this.
Oh God, and I have 3 minutes.
No, you have the time that you want to take.
No, guys, the problem is I need to leave.
Okay.
I wish I didn't have to, because there's another podcast. So, okay, let me try to do this the Hollywood way, right? I'm pitching a movie, right? First of all, this was not a coup. This was a union dispute, essentially. The problem is that the union leader, Prigozhin, he had a tremendous problem with the big boss, Shoigu, much more than with the big boss, which is Gerasimov. The bad blood between Prigozhin and Shoigu is something that it's in Moscow, it's legendary already. I had a confirmation of the whole, even before the coup. In fact, even before the subversion, 2 months before it. In fact, this was in early May. I was in a cruise at the Moskva River. I cannot tell you what I was doing there. It's very, very important in terms of multipolarity, but it remains a secret. And we stopped at one of the anchor places by the river, and a Donbass commander who had become a politician got in. So I asked my hosts, can I ask him directly about Prigozhin? And they said, yeah, of course, no problem. So I asked him directly, and he knows all the players well, including Prigozhin. And he said, yes, basically it's an ego problem. Prigozhin thinks that he should be in the position that Shoigu is. And he thinks that Shoigu is essentially incompetent. And he feels that he has been betrayed by the Ministry of Defense every time that it was requesting more artillery, more weapons, etc. in Donbass. Well, so we have the personal problems between these two main characters. At the same time, Prigozhin had been telegraphing that the situation was becoming unbearable, and he would opt for some, I would say, desperate measures. And this is exactly what he did. He thought that he would have enough support among Wagner. Enough support, I mean tens of thousands of troops, to join on this march, which he qualified as peaceful, from Rostov to Moscow. And they were very well received in Rostov, by the way, Wagner, when the whole thing started. Because, of course, Rostov is one of the headquarters of the Ministry of Defense. This is where, for instance, Surovikin coordinates the war in Donbass. It's from Rostov, essentially. And then they started the march, and they saw that there would be joined by tens of thousands of Wagners, basically to go to Moscow and request a personal meeting with Shoigu and preferably also with Gerasimov. There was nothing ever from the beginning of we are marching to Moscow to depose Vladimir Putin. This is absolute top class, I would say, CIA bullshit, which if you see it on the front page of the New York Times and the Washington Post, this qualifies it officially as bullshit. The problem is Putin felt betrayed personally, and this I got from some very good sources, I would say close to the Kremlin, but not inside the Kremlin. In fact, these sources are closer to the intel community, and they talked to me about the role of Bortnikov, the head of the FSB. Bortnikov was absolutely instrumental to defuse the whole situation because he got Lukashenko on board. Lukashenko talked to Bortnikov and he said, look, I can talk to Prigozhin and I'll try to defuse this whole thing. He did. So when he talked to Prigozhin and he tried to defuse the whole thing, afterwards he phoned Bortnikov and said, look, it's done. We have a deal. And then Bortnikov told Putin. So if my sources are correct, this is absolutely extraordinary because Putin was just surveilling the landscape and said, okay, who is going to show up to defuse the situation? I'm just waiting. And the two guys who showed up are essential in what happens from now on. Lukashenko, which is the union, the relationship between Russia and Belarus, and Bortnikov, the head of FSB, who obviously has some political career ahead of him when he leaves the FSB. And this is something that I would like to get into later on when I'm back in Moscow.
Okay, so before, I don't want to keep you hostage anymore. I know you're on a schedule. I want to give a shout out to Mike P. I hope we answered some of your questions in the pod, but I do want to have Pepe back on to talk about Chinese development programs.
My pleasure.
Latin America. So Mike wanted to say thank you for your to you, Pepe. Thank you for your contributions to our knowledge despite blockage in the US due to media cowardice. And then Lars said, Pepe, you are the best journalist reporter and are awakening and radicalizing multitudes. You are everywhere on the planet. Where can I find a current list of all your publications, articles, and interviews?
Oh, that's very complicated because I don't know where to find it. Okay, the short answer is, at the moment, I am publishing exclusives for 3 media. The Cradle in Beirut, Sputnik Global, Sputnik based in Moscow, and Strategic Culture, which is also based in Moscow. A lot of people republish my stuff all over the place and translating several languages. So if you have the title of one of the columns, you can find where else it was published, and you can also find translations in Italian, Portuguese, French, Urdu, whatever, you know. I'm planning to open a Substack in September, which will be a way of organizing everything that I have been publishing since forever, the past 30 years at least, and also an aggregator, because I want to get a lot of people, including you guys, DD, related to the Substack as well. I like the Substack to be a sort of central in terms of analyzing the evolution of Eurasia integration, the place to go, where you're going to have my work and you're going to have links to work of several important people, media channels all over the world, and we are all doing the same thing essentially. So
just warmed my lukewarm heart.
Wonderful.
I am so excited.
Thank you. It's a very complicated thing because I never even opened a website for me because I never had time. I travel a lot and my life is sometimes very messy, but now it's time. And a lot of people had been suggesting that I should open a Substack. So I'm going to do it. And this will be linked to very important conversations that we are having in Europe here for that, in Italy especially, and Russia, in terms of uniting all these multipolar efforts everywhere and bring our African friends as well. So I hope this is going to be big and interest a lot of people.
It is. I can feel it. I can feel it.
Thank you.
There's some sort of energy. You can feel the working class energy, Pepe?
Yes, I can. And man, I need to hang out with the working class. I used to, you know where I used to do that? In Southeast Asia. I was hanging out with the working class in Thailand, in Cambodia, in Laos, and all that. And when you come back to Europe, obviously, you have other complicated fish to fry. In Brazil as well was great. I talked to a lot of workers in Brazil, pure, certified working class. That was wonderful as well. And this is something I usually do when I go to Argentina as well. And I wish next year I'll have the opportunity to do that in Africa. I miss traveling in Africa. The last time I traveled was in West Africa. I was backpacking West Africa. So
DD's going to Africa. We're going to Africa.
Wonderful. Way to go. Okay, guys, I'm so sorry, but I have to leave. They're already calling me here.
Sorry. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And look, let's do the next one on China, BRICS, and Asia, right?
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
Okay, guys, thank you so much. You rule.
You rule. And thank you all for listening. This has been another episode of the DD Geopolitics podcast. Until next time.